Ammar, there
Sorry, good morning, listeners and viewers and everyone out there. You're listening to Ammar and
Jalf.
Live on our weekly radio show and on Zoom here. And each week
we bring some views, news, and one or two clues from the business world.
Asian Business Connections aims to connect, support, and promote the Asian and wider communities.
And we'll be talking shop quite literally, not just corner shop. Whether you start a business, have an existing business, or you just want to talk business, we can help.
We can help. We can help, and we do help. Gosh, I think that that it's playing in the background.
Nice, some nice classic.
And,
I thought you were going to just let that play there.
hey, it just keeps jumping in. Wonderful, I think it stopped. Yeah, here we are. And apologies to our radio listeners for the slightly delayed question. So the question is, was the impact of global economic influences on our economy? And, you know, one of the things that he said, Jalf, and I'm talking about last night's Bank of England curriculum. One of the things that Mauricio had said was very much we could and were using a number of excuses as influences impacting us, right? But those excuses are no longer valid. So, for example, the things that you've mentioned, Brexit's happened, it's done. The war's happening, it's happened, and the cost of energy has soared. And there's a whole host and range of other influencing factors, historic ones, that have impacted us. But the single and most significant contributory factor to where we are is this vicious cycle of cost increases. Right? So all that is happening, and that is primarily driven by employment and wages. So, and the only lever the Bank of England has is interest rate costs. And my point earlier on, and my comment to you earlier on was, people's behaviors are not changing. Everybody's complaining about the cost of living, right? But people's behaviors aren't changing. So all that is happening is businesses are just paying people more wages, right? They're putting up their prices, and people are still going and buying those products and services. So until one of those things stops, it's just going to get worse. And the bank can only do one thing: keep raising interest rates. So cost of money goes up. What do businesses do and what do people do? put their costs up. Rental prices have gone up from, as we'd explained and suggested, £500–600 to £800–900. There isn't enough property. There's not enough places for people to live.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very worrying, Ammar. I think I don't think it's solely just down to the cost in labour. That's one of the big factors. I think obviously you've got labour, you've got energy, and you've got general raw material costs.
Labour's the biggest. No, but you can't do much about energy.
Yeah.
You can't, right? As in, the cost of energy is the cost of energy. You can't do much about it. You can't do much around supply costs. Well, you can, because supply costs are equally impacted by labour.
Mm-hmm.
So the single one thing that you can do something about is labour costs. But there isn't enough people. Did you know, for the first time in history, the Northeast has a lower unemployment rate than the rest of the UK.
Mm.
First time in history.
Right.
So there's less people unemployed here than in other places of the country, as the average in the country.
Mm. Why is that, Ammar?
No, I just it might be a blip. It might be, the figures something might have happened, or we haven't recorded it properly, or whatever. There's a variety of factors, but technically there are more people in jobs than out of jobs. So what does that do, Jeff?
Mm.
If you're looking for staff,
Mm-hmm.
the only way you can get them, if there isn't this pool of unemployed people or people looking for work, is to poach other people's staff, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do that, how are you going to do that? You're going to have to pay them more than what the other person's paid.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that's. I think that's just another one of the problems that businesses in the region have to deal with. I think for overall, in terms, it's probably a good thing, Mark, that there is more employment in the region.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think it is genuinely fantastic. And I love the fact that we are better, and we are better in a table. It's been some time. Anyway, Mark's joining us remotely. Our great friend. He'll have a good insight, I imagine, on this. Do you not think?
I think so, definitely.
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Patton.
Hello, Mark. Good morning.
Morning, Jeff. How are you?
Hey, very nice views, Mark.
Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, no sunshine today.
What is the wheel?
So I think this was a conceptual image of a proposal a number of years ago to have a wheel on the other side of the river, on the Gateshead side.
Really? What is that? Was that the way I wheel?
I think so. Yeah.
No, because the way I wheel was
on our side, right?
Spinners, and I think there's some controversy there. But yeah, I think this was a slightly different one, I believe. But yeah, it'd be a wonderful thing to have.
It would. It would.
So, good morning, Mark. Thank you for joining us. Let's start by saying who you are, what you do, and why you do it, please.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Mark Patton. I'm the Assistant Director for Education and Skills with Newcastle City Council. And very simply, why I do what I do is because I believe that children deserve the best opportunities to help to prepare them for the future as adults in their communities and our society, and also the workforce of tomorrow. So that's basically why I do what I do, why I'm in education, why I started my career as a teacher. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you for that. Thank you for joining us. We always enjoy your company. It actually forces us, Mark. So what you're probably unaware of is we only go into the studio when we're meeting you.
Ah, right. I did wonder.
Yes. So because anyway, because of the wonders of technology, and because we tend to record these sessions now, which allows us more exposure, and it's far easier to record things when we're online. You know, the time that we're in the studio, it's a great excuse, if I say so myself, because it forces Jalf and I to physically meet and then have a wonderful conversation with yourself. But yes, we tend to do this via Zoom, and here we are. So one of the things that we were talking about, Mark, and we'd love your view on this, is the cost of living crisis. And we've spent quite a bit of time this morning talking about this, and also on the back of, we had our curry club last night at Brew Dolphin, and we had Mauricio, the Northern Bank of England representative, do an incredible job of explaining inflationary facts and figures, and giving us insights around that, and also highlighting that the only lever the Bank of England has is the interest rate lever. And one of the things that I've been saying, and I have been saying for quite some time, is that this lever, because it's the only lever they've got, doesn't seem to be working at all, and people continue to spend, and businesses and organizations continue to put up their prices, and until one of those give, we're going to keep seeing the impact of this getting worse. And one of the things that I then highlighted and shared was the fact that our unemployment rate is lower than the UK average for the first time in history. I wondered if you had any insights on that.
Well, I mean, I'm not a financier at all, so I have no insight in terms of the mechanisms that go on in the background. What I do have an insight into personally is the impact of the policies in terms of raising that base rate, and I also have an insight into the impact that it has in the sector that I work in. So I see it day in and day out in terms of the pressure that families and therefore children and young people are under to even meet the basics of life in terms of having a safe and secure roof over their head that's warm when it needs to be, that there is food on the table, and that they can, where possible, go out and earn a living to try and meet the demands that are placed upon them. In terms of children and young people, there is an undoubted impact in terms of the amount of, in some of our communities, the amount of food that's on the table. And that brings into sharp focus for us in Newcastle the hard work that our schools do with families to try and maximise the free school meals funding that we get from the government, and draw that down to at least provide when children are in school a warm and nutritious meal at least once a day. And I can't believe I'm saying that in the 21st century, if I'm being honest. You know, we have one of the highest free school meal rates in the entire country in this city. And the last figures that I saw were around 40%. 40%. That's 4 in 10 of our children and young people are entitled to free school meals, meaning that there is some degree of food poverty in their household. And we're in the 21st century, in a first world country. And something doesn't quite.
Something
Sorry,
not
Jim.
on track, Mark, is it? I mean, that's what we've been kind of talking about economically. Some things are just not right at the moment. And really the boys, the MPs, the ministers, they really need to get a grip very, very fast and put money and develop the country in a way where it should come in terms of protection of kids and making sure, as you say, they should. I mean, in the UK, one of the most powerful countries in the world for centuries, that we can't be in that state today where we're worried about food poverty and stuff. It's just unbelievable.
It is, and it's extremely difficult for us at a local level, and by that I mean families themselves and communities and action groups, to feel as if there is any kind of influence on policy and on direction. And that's not to say that people are not trying, because they and we are, we use every opportunities, as I'm sure Jalf, in the circles that you move in, and Ammar in the circles that you move in, try to make it really clear with concrete examples of the impact of the current economic crisis on our children and on our families, as well as on ourselves directly. Another area that causes a great deal of embarrassment and frustration is around simple things like having the right equipment to go to school, or having an appropriate place within the home or within the community to do work away from school, and those challenges really, are just incredibly difficult to overcome. Schools try their best, communities try their best. So, for example, there are more in Newcastle now than there were when I arrived 5 years ago. There are more places and opportunities to swap school uniform and to swap school shoes, because the need is greater now, because people just simply can't afford some of the items that their children need to come to school. Now, schools do their best and try and keep those uniform costs as low as possible, but clothing is not cheap. Even basic clothing is just not cheap anymore. It's really hard. And then when you look at schools themselves and the amount of funding that schools have been receiving over the last few years, I think there was a study published by one big organisation. It might have been the Office for National Statistics last year, looking at the real terms funding over the last 10 years that's gone into schools when you try and account for inflation rate over that time, and it's fallen, and you just think, schools can only do so much with what they've got to try and help, and schools are really struggling with the basics that they need. And the most basic thing that school needs, beyond a warm and safe building, is staff. And that's the as it is in most businesses, that's the biggest proportion of the bill, are the salaries of the people that are employed to do the work. And we could go off on a tangent here and talk about the raft of industrial action that's going on in not just education, but in a whole range of sectors, because people are not being paid enough to help them to meet the daily demands of life at the moment.
And that's really interesting, right, Mark? Because one of the this isn't a universal everybody impacted type of situation, right? So a bit like COVID, everyone was impacted. Didn't matter who you were, you could get it. You know, everyone was in lockdown. That was that. This current challenge, cost of living crisis, is compounded by the fact that at one end you've got people who aren't being paid enough, and then the factors that are contributing to the cost of living crisis are that the private sector, there aren't enough people to go around, and people are demanding wage increases, but without being more productive. We're the least, one of the least productive countries in the world globally, you know, by virtue of output per hour. And for the same productivity, we're having to pay people more. By having to pay people more, we're having to put prices of goods and services up. So it's that sort of virtuous circle and cycle of sort of activities, events that are leading to the amplification of sort of cost of living crisis. So those that have, you know, are sort of breaking further apart from the have-nots. And that's what's sort of shocking to see. You know, 40% of our children and young people having free school meals. You know, and then inevitably what does that lead to? An increase on public spending, an increase on taxes, an increase on sort of costs, because someone's got to pay for it somewhere. You know, we were talking, there's this huge criticism of private landlords having to put up rents and making it unaffordable. But actually, all they're doing is passing on the costs of the sort of tenfold increase in their mortgages, right? As in, what's meant to happen there. So the challenge that we've got is, because the Bank of England only have one lever, and that's interest rates, and that's the only thing they do. And because the economy is continuing to use this term overheat, because, you know, unemployment's 3.6% here. Nationally, it's 3.8%. There isn't enough workforce here to satisfy what employers need. And because of that, we're having to poach people. Because of that, they're being paid more. Because of that, prices are going up. It's an incredible, untenable situation.
I want just one point on everything that you said, which I think is even more worrying, is the fact that if you're saying that we're one of the we're kind of the most employed region in the whole country.
No. We've for the first time in history,
right,
we are below the UK average for unemployment for the first time ever, and that might be a blip. It might be because of something happened somewhere we didn't record. You know, there's a whole range of factors that could be the case. But anyway, statistically, from the Office of National Statistics, unemployment rate first time ever lower than the UK average.
But Ammar, I'm assuming that if you look at the average household, you probably got both parents are working, right? Now, based on both parents working and being and the average that you just mentioned, and even in those circumstances, if it means that we've still got food poverty and 40% of the kids have to, you know, on free school meals. That's very worrying, isn't it? It's not the situation where the parents were they were just unemployed and not bothered about getting a job, and but that's not the case. People that you got two parents going out working as hard as they can, and they still can't make ends meet, and that's the biggest worry.
I don't, simply put, you're absolutely right. It is shocking that in this day and age, we have such high levels of poverty and high levels of deprivation that people are struggling to simply feed their children. And I've used it's not an analogy at all. In fact, I've used this factual story on many occasions, that it's a horrible position to be in, where you're deciding, do you put money in the meter to keep the lights on, or do you feed the family? In this day and age, that extraordinary, and especially when from a less developed country option, you would just light a fire, or you could light a fire, or there's other options. You can't do that here. And it's a horrible thought to have, but as in, your options here are restricted even further because of how developed we are as a country.
Yeah, and we're making reference to in this day and age, because the presumption was going through the difficulties of maybe it's the World Wars and World War IIs, and and just being the nation that we are, the third or fourth richest economy in the world. And if we're going through this, I don't think it's an easy fix somehow. I think it's been an accumulation of a number of poor, bad decisions made over the last decade or so, and I think the impact has been so catastrophic and so widespread. I just don't see how they can kind of have a quick fix in everything that we're experiencing. I think there's a lot more pain ahead.
Undoubtedly, there's no question about that. And hindsight is probably one of the best foresights you could ever have. If we knew this, and this was exactly what Mauricio from the Bank of England was saying, right? Everybody keeps telling the Bank of England, well, you should have increased interest rates far sharper, far quicker. You should have done it earlier. You should have done it, you should have foreseen this, and da-da-da-da-da, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The part of that consideration, part of that consideration is, imagine if the Bank of England during COVID, because statistically, this is when they should have done what they're doing now, is during COVID, it put the interest rates up to 5%. Well, you wouldn't.
So they're saying that interest rate's going to slow that inflation more. I'm just trying to work out.
They are hoping that this isn't.
What's their thought process on that? Do you know?
Well, I mean, it was explained somewhat, but primarily the anticipation is that the only lever that they've got, which is interest rates, leads to one of those critical components that lead to inflation coming to a halt. So the fact is sadly, Mark, even those that have not are still being forced to pay the prices, the inflationary prices of the goods that exist. And if businesses continue to inflate the costs of their products and services, if people continue to get paid inflationary wages, well, that inevitably is going to continue inflation.
I agree. I mean, I think, as I said at the beginning, I'm not an economics expert at all, but I think I get the basic grasp of, you push up inflation rates, that puts less money in people's pockets. There's less spending, and that should bring down the rate of inflation. That's the very simplistically, that's what I understand is the mechanism. However, I think there's a slight, not a flaw, that there's something wrong with the model, because it kind of, I think it assumes that when people have to cut back because there is less money in their pocket, because the inflation rates, sorry, the interest rates are high, that they will spend less on, let's say, higher value goods and higher value services. They won't go out as often if they go out to eat, for example, or they'll choose not to get a new car this year, or whatever it is, and focus more on the basics of life, such as putting food on the table and paying rent. However, I think we're past the point where many of our communities in Newcastle don't engage in very inverted commas, luxurious spend anymore. They haven't been doing that for years and years and years. And all that's happening is that those families have now got less money in their pocket to pay for those basic things like heating a home, putting food on the table, and getting their children to school and getting themselves to work. So it doesn't work, as I think you were trying to say, Ammar, for those who are at the very far end of poverty. There is nothing to cut back on other than food.
And you're absolutely right, Mark. But sadly, and I use this term in that very sense, there are enough people out there who continue to spend and continue to influence this vicious virtual cycle of events, because that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
And it needs a shock of some sort to abruptly, and it's such a shame, but there has to be an economic shock to us.
That's worrying though. The economic shock you're talking about, I think there has been talks about, the collapse of currencies in A, B, C, and D. I hope it's not that kind of an economic shock where you're moving on to the other things that they've been talking about, a central digital banking system and this and that, because I don't think.
I'm talking about more, right? So look at the housing statistics, right? Because it's a useful benchmark. House prices, and it was quite a contradictory statement by Nationwide. House sales have dropped. Actually, house sales have dropped by 3.5%, but house prices have continued to rise by 1.9%. Right? So it's like, what? All of these inflation. There isn't one particular thing that could or should immediately transform all of this. You're right to suggest this is a series of a variety of influences and factors. The key point here is we can no longer blame all of the macroeconomic challenges like Ukraine and energy costs and all of that, because we've acclimatized to everything. The economy has acclimatized to all of that. So it's the key core factor here right now is people are being paid more than what they should be. And sadly, Mark, for those that haven't and aren't, that's increasing. But in the main, people are being paid more than what they should be based on productivity. So, if everybody was increasing their output, so if we were making sort of, you went from 10 cars to 20 cars and you increased people's wages, well, that would be fine. You'd absorb it because the output's more, you're making more money and whatever else. Anyway, I'm conscious we've already got 3 minutes. Mark, tell us something good. Tell us something positive. Tell us something what we should be grateful for.
Okay, two things. One looking back and one looking forward. So last week, I don't know if you've seen on social media, and it was reported elsewhere, there was a fantastic music festival up at the Newcastle Eagles Arena on Scotswood Road, celebrating a huge diversity of talent and cultural influences on music in the city schools. And I just wanted to celebrate that. So if you haven't had a chance to look at social media and look at some of the clips, then do so. If ever you wanted your heart and spirit lifting by looking at the future of our society, which is our children, and what they can do when they set their mind to it, then look at that. Looking forwards, 3 weeks left of the school term before we get to the summer holidays. So this is the time when thousands of our children and young people across the city, and indeed every local authority up and down the country, will be nervously looking forward to seeing what their new school is going to be like. Those children who are moving school because it's the end of primary or the end of first school or middle school, or even secondary school, to go to college or off into training. It's a transition. It's a key important transitional point in the year, which brings nervousness, but also a real opportunity to reflect back on the past and also to look forward. So in terms of positive messages, go out there and grab it. If as a child or a young person you're involved in something that's going to change next year, then yes, it can be scary, but also it's part of life. It happens all the time. We just don't stand still. So a huge thank you as well to schools as we head towards the end of the school year for the work that they have done this academic year to put our children and young
Spice
people
FM 98.8 FM.
In France, more than 600 people have been arrested in a third night of unrest. It comes after tensions continue to grow after the shooting of a 17-year-old delivery